By the end of this video, you will have met the three most common uses of the participles in the Greek New Testament. Hi, Rob McIver here. Let's talk about participles, but let's do it carefully, and let's do it in a way that makes them easier to understand for beginners. We have here a graph of the times each particular mood of the verb is found in the New Testament. And by far the most frequently used mood is the indicative mood. The next most frequently used mood, though, is the participle. And we're not going to be able to understand the New Testament without knowing a little bit about participles. So this is an important topic. It's usually left a little bit later because there are some challenges associated with it, but it will repay the time you spent in studying. A beginner probably wants to know, well, does English have participles? And the answer is yes. English has a present participle and a past participle. You can work out the present participle by saying I am eating, I am running. Or the past participle by saying I have eaten, I have run. Well, actually both of those are irregular in the past participle. Let's think of a more regular verb like the verb to love. I am loving, I have loved. Present participle, loving. Past participle, loved. A very frequent use of participles in English is to form tenses which emphasize the continuous nature of the action. For example, I am loving, I was loving, I have been loving, and I had been loving. Well, an English speaker just feels that there's an emphasis on the continuous nature of the action of loving. For the past participle, we have I have loved, I had loved, and I am being loved, I was being loved, I have been loved, and I had been loved. And we use these constructions quite frequently in English. It's perhaps worth pointing out that the I am loving, I was loving, I have been loving, I had been loving has an exact equivalent in Greek, where you have a form of the verb to be with a participle of some kind. It's called a periphrastic tense, and while they occur in the New Testament, they don't occur as often as they do in English. So I leave that as a topic for students studying intermediate New Testament Greek. As well as being used to form tenses, English participles, particularly the present participle, are used where we would use an adjective. So they're kind of used like adjectives. For example, a man might be described with the adjective righteous, the righteous man. Or we can say the running man. The present participle running acts as an adjective in the phrase the running man. Or we can talk about the obedient dog, for example, obedient being an adjective, or the hunting dog. Hunting, of course, is the present participle of the verb to hunt. We can talk about a well-dressed child, well-dressed being an adjective, or we can talk about an eating child, the present participle eating being used just like an adjective. I might mention in passing that if you were learning English as a second language, while the present participles are usually formed by adding ing to the verb, past participles can be irregular. And in fact, every verb that I use to introduce strong aorists in my book, Beginning New Testament Greek Made Easier, turns out to have an irregular past participle. I am dying. Well, the ing is regular present participle, but I have died. I am eating. I have eaten. I am finding. I have found, and so on. You can see them all there. Now, how do the Greek and English participles compare? Well, I have here a couple of lines of a table I used in my overview of Greek moods, which is one of the videos available on the video channel, New Testament Greek Made Easier. The indicative in English and Greek are used in very similar ways, and I've tried to express this with this graph. We have the Greek uses and the English uses pretty much overlap. Now, when it comes to participles, most of the English uses of a participle can be found in Greek, but Greek has a large number of uses of the participle that have no equivalent in English. And this can make them a challenge to understand. Well, let us now consider how participles are formed in the Greek New Testament. Here we have the paradigm of the present participle active of the verb luo, our pattern verb. And as you can see, that as well as tense, mood, and voice, participles also have case, number, and gender. So it means that each paradigm has 3 columns of 8. And not only that, there are paradigms for the weak aorist active, the strong aorist active, the perfect active, the present participle of eİmī, and most of those for the middle and active voice as well. Wow, that seems to be a lot to learn. Towards the end of the video, we are indeed going to have a look at most of these, but on first meeting them, there seems to be an awful lot of them. That's not making participles easier for the beginner, is it? Okay, well, do I have any suggestions on how to make participles easier? As a matter of fact, I do. My suggestion is that we begin by looking at the most commonly met participles, which combination of tense, voice, case, etc. are found most frequently in the Greek New Testament. Well, if you inquire of logos and accordance, you can build up a table somewhat like this. And if you look at it, you will see that some combinations of tense and voice are found much more frequently than others. The present and aorist actives are found so much more frequently than the others, and as you can see from the table, I've also highlighted a few of the other combinations that appear to be used more frequently. By the way, these numbers are for the Gospel of John, but if you do the same exercise for the whole of the New Testament, you essentially get the same pattern. All right, that's the first step. The next step is to take these common combinations of tense and voice and ask which are the most common cases used by these tenses. Doing another analysis, you get a table like this one. And once again, we see there are some particular combinations that are found much more frequently than the others. In particular, the nominative singular of the present active are found much more often than anything else, somewhat followed by the nominative singular of the aorist active, and their plurals are found reasonably often as well. So here's the payoff. Yes, do you remember that daunting list of paradigms of participles found in the New Testament? We have narrowed that down to the 7 most common ones. And in fact, the beginner can get away with just knowing about 4 of them, at least from the start. Yeah, you're going to want to know them all at some stage, and later in the video we're going to be looking at them in more detail. But at the start, you can get by with just these 4. And they are the nominative singular of the present and aorist actives, and that is the ending own. See, luon. And in the aorist, we've got the strong aorist, which uses the same own ending. For labone, the weak aorist uses lusas, and used slightly less often, but probably worth knowing, are the nominative plurals of the present and aorist participle actives. And the endings are ontes, and again, the strong aorist use the same endings, so luontes for the present tense. For lambano, that would be lambanontes for the present tense, and labontes for the aorist tense. And then we have lusantes for the weak aorist nominative plurals. Why don't we look at some examples of participles from the Gospel of John using these endings? In this table, I've shown you the basic pattern verbs. So there's luon, for example, in the nominative singular present participle active. And under that, I've put ho agapone. Now, in a second or two, I'm going to explain this means the one who loves. You can see that there is the participle ending on agapao, and we translate that as the one who loves. The next one's a bit tricky. It's ho own. We find in a little while that own is the nominative singular present participle active of eİmī. Yes, that's going to be fun. So it is the one who is. Ho lambanon is the one who takes, from lambano. Ho menon, from meno, to remain. So ho menon is the one who remains. And ho poion, from poieo, I make, the one who makes. Now we have some examples of aorist tense constructions here. So we've got ho elthon, the one who comes. You'll notice that it's still translated pretty much the same. The difference is aspect. We're going to talk about that in a second or two as well. Ho labon, the one who takes. Those are both strong aorists, and you'll see they've used the aorist stands elth and lab and added the own ending on it. And for the weak aorist, the pattern word is lusas. So we have anoixas from anoigo, the one who opens, because anoigo means I open. Ho pempsas, the one who sends, pempo, I send. And poiesas, the one who does, and it's very similar in the plural. So we have luontes as the pattern verb, and we have hoi blepontes, those who see, blepo, I see. We have hoi legontes, those who are saying, and we have hoi pistuontes, those who believe. From pistuo, I believe, and lego, I say. And the aorist tense, quite similarly, we've got some strong aorists there. Hoi elthontes, those who are following, from erchomai, which has a strong aorist, elthon. We have idontes from horeo, which has a strong aorist, idon. And hoi idontes is those who see. The nominative plural weak aorist is lusantes. So the news is good, really. When you meet a participle in John, and in fact the rest of the New Testament, it is highly likely that the ending is going to be own, omega, nu. And while most of them will likely be present participle actives, we're going to have a significant number of strong aorist participle actives having that same ending. Now, as well as the own ending, which is going to be used more than any of the other endings, we have sas, we have ontes, and we have santes. So, just knowing those four endings is an enormous start in knowing how to recognize participles. And in fact, we can illustrate the uses of participles in John and the rest of the New Testament with only those four endings. So let's go and do that. You'll remember the observation that the paradigm of the participles look like an adjective. And participles often act in a way that one would expect an adjective to act in the New Testament. So let's look at some examples. Most of these are taken from just 1 John. Ho legon, ho agapone, ho misone. And if you remember, the own ending is the nominative masculine singular ending. Ho legon is translated the one who says. Ho agapone, the one who loves. Ho misone, the one who hates. Do you see the pattern here? They can crop up in plural. I couldn't find one in 1 John, but I did find hoi legontes, the plural of ho legon, in Matthew 23, those who say. And here are some other examples just taken from the Gospel of John itself. As you might guess, these are set passages that I had one year for one of my classes, so I just used the notes I'd taken from there. Ho erchomenos, the one who comes. Ho own, the one who is. Ho pistuon, the one who believes. Ho poion, the one who does. To erchomenon, the one who comes. Ho katabas, the one who comes down. Ho theoron, the one who sees, well, etc. Once you get to recognize the pattern, even though English doesn't do this, you will quickly recognize the pattern. Article plus participle is used as the one who. For a start, it's a little unfamiliar, but very quickly you'll be delighted to see them, because here's a participle that is really easy to translate and understand. If you're wondering if other parts of the New Testament use the same construction, well, here's some examples taken from the New Testament epistles. Ho agapone, the one who loves, found in Ephesians 5. Ta hen phronuntos, the one mind or the one attitude. Ho sulagon, the one taken off as booty. Ton genomenon, that have come into being. Yes. Once we move from the Gospels, the Greek gets a little more challenging, but you can see it's basically the same idea, the one who. And how is this like an adjective? Well, let's take the English adjective dead. We can put the word the in front of it to make them the dead. So even though it's not often found in English, we do in fact use adjectives in this way in English. Sometimes a participle is used as an adjective even when the article is not present. And here are two examples from John chapter 1. Anthropos, apostelmenos, para, theo. That's the participle from apo, stello, sent. Sent is a ambassador. A man, anthropos, sent, apostelmenos, by God. Or a man who was sent by God. To phos erchomenon eiston cosmon, the light coming into the world. And in fact, you can see the English present participle used to translate erchomenon. Used very like in English, and it's used as an adjective. Now, when we get to some of the New Testament epistles, there are some fairly interesting uses of the participle as an adjective that can most easily be found by subscribing to my channel, New Testament Greek Made Easier. Another very common use of the participle in the Greek New Testament is to create a reference to time. And in this case, the participle is used as an adverb. It's translated with some such word as when, while, as, after. Yes, can be any one of those depending on the context and on the tense. This use of the participle is quite different to English, and you'll probably need a few examples before you will recognize the pattern, and even more practice before you'll be comfortable when a participle is used as an adverb with a time reference. But the good news is they're found often enough that you're going to get plenty of practice, and suddenly they won't seem strange anymore, and you'll just translate them and interpret them without thinking much about them. Oh, that's a time reference or a temporal adverbial participle. So let's look at some examples. Kai elthon ho Jesus eistain oikeion Petru eiden. And after Jesus came into the house of Peter, he saw. So the participle here is elthon. It's from the verb erchomai. And you probably remember erchomai. It has the aorist althon. And elthon is the aorist participle. Hey, we really need to know our verbs quite well to be at all comfortable with recognizing participles and what verb they're from and what their tense is. I'll talk a bit about that in a second. So, kai alphone, and when Jesus entered the house, he saw, right? So the verb is eiden, and the alphone is about that. So, well, it's probably not when, after, right? He'd done this first, and it is in the aorist tense, and so the aorist tense is usually about something that happens before the action of the main verb. So, and after Jesus entered the house of Peter, he saw, and the story goes on. Torta ipone Jesus, ex althin sun tois mathetes or tu. Ipone Yes, do you recognize it? It's from Lego, isn't it? The aorist indicative Lego is ipon. So ipon is the aorist participle, the nominative masculine singular aorist participle active of Lego. And again, it's a reference to the verb, which is exalthen. So they went out. And the ipon is after Jesus said these things. So again, it's a aorist tense, so it happens before the action of the main verb. After Jesus said these things, he went out with his disciples. Let's look at another example. Kai ex elphone, eiden pollen oklon kai. So the main verb is eiden, he saw. The participle is ex elphone. Well, we've seen elphone in the first example, haven't we? And know that that's from the verb erchomai. So ex erchomai went out. And after he went out, he saw a large crowd. Once you recognize that this is a time reference, it's adverbial, talks about the eiden. After he went out, he saw a great crowd. Our last example here from John chapter 9. Kai huron auton ipon. Huron is from heurisco, which has an irregular aorist indicative of huron. Again, we need to know our irregular aorists, don't we? It's the nominative masculine singular aorist participle active of heurisco. The main verb is ipen. The main verb is in the indicative mood, and it usually is or often is. He said, and when he found him, he said, or after he found him, he said. So these are all examples of translating the participle as an adverb. There is one use of a participle in John where the best translation is just to add ing. In other words, just use an English present participle. He answered epikrithe legon. He answered saying. Well, the saying seems redundant in English, but it is there in Greek, and it's a construction that is often found in the New Testament. Angelos ephane or to legon. An angel appeared saying. Epikrithesan legosai. They answered saying. So here is the third use of the participle in Greek, using ing as a translation. If you put the English present participle in the sentence, you can sometimes figure out what is going on. Now, in the Gospels, the three translations, the one who, when, while, as, after, etc. So first of all, the one who. Secondly, the adverbial use with reference to time, when, while, after. And ing will cover pretty much most of the participles you will meet, especially in the Gospel of John, where the one who, the article plus the participle, is a very frequently found construction. Once we move out of the Gospels, though, and even there sometimes, the participles have other uses. Now, in the beginning, New Testament Greek made easier, we are just satisfied with meeting the three most common uses that are found in the Gospels, and it's in the intermediate New Testament Greek made easier that I cover some of the other uses of the participle. Unfortunately, when you move from the textbook into the New Testament, you never know when you are going to meet one of these other kinds of participles. So I recommend that you get an intermediate grammar, and of course the one I recommend is Intermediate New Testament Greek made easier. There will be some videos related to some of these uses on the channel New Testament Greek made easier. So how should we make participles easier in beginning New Testament Greek? Well, I have some suggestions here. The first big one is to know your verbs. All right, you need to know the strong aorists and even the weak aorists thoroughly. A common way to do this is to learn principal parts. So there's an appendix in my book, Beginning New Testament Greek Made Easier, and a longer appendix in the book Intermediate New Testament Greek Made Easier, which lists the principal parts, which are the present, the future, the aorist, the perfect active voice, and the perfect and aorist passive voice. Once you know the principal parts, you will be able to very easily recognize the verb and the tense involved. Secondly, I'll learn to recognize participles. Now, here your teacher will give you guidance. If you're a student in one of my classes, I would say, yes, it probably is worthwhile just practicing writing out the paradigm of the participles a few times, just so that you get the feel of them. But the more important thing is to recognize them, and you'll do this as you practice and as you read the New Testament, and you say, well, look, this is a own ending. Yes, that is a participle. I could be confused that looks like a genitive plural masculine or genitive plural neuter, but no, it's a participle and it's on a verb, and it's a verb that's in the aorist tense. You'll be able to quickly recognize participles. So, as I say, if you're my student, I would say recognize them. It wouldn't hurt to write them out a few times, but it probably is... it's just something you learn to recognize. So when we are translating and we are beginning New Testament Greek students, we ask the following questions. And in fact, if you're intermediate Greek New Testament students, we start with these questions and add a few. So the first question is, does the participle have an article in front of it? If it does, you say, yes, this is easy. It means the one who. Then if it doesn't, try translating it with some reference to time, after, during, while. And that will work very frequently in the New Testament, most frequently in the Gospels, and even quite frequently across the epistles and other writing that are found in the New Testament. And if that doesn't work, just try translating it with the English present participle. In other words, try ing. And the final thing, as usual, is practice is going to be very helpful. So if you're a beginning student, there are 2 chapters that are related to the uses of the participle. The one who is covered in chapter 26 of my book, Beginning New Testament Greek Made Easier. And the when, while, etc., the temporal reference and the ing reference is covered in chapter 28 of that book. For a reference tool, though, it is handy to have the book Intermediate New Testament Greek Made Easier, where there is a more extended list of uses of the participles. In both books, there is exercises which give you practice, and that is the key to becoming familiar with participles and how they should be translated and interpreted in the New Testament. So how are participles formed in the Greek New Testament? Well, here is the present participle active of luo. And if you run your eye down the masculine column, you will see luon, luonto, luontos, luonti. And you will probably recognize that this is the endings that are used of third declension nouns, both masculine and feminine. And if we look at the neuter, we will see endings that are not dissimilar to the neuter third declension endings. And if we look at the feminine, sa, san, say, etc., they are like the first declension feminine noun endings. Now, here we can see the aorist participles, and as you can see, they also follow a third declension pattern for their masculine and neuter, and a first declension pattern for their feminine. They are characterized by adding sigma, and all of the changes that we come when we add sigma to a verb occur. So we have weak aorist with gutturals, labials, and dentals, and we have strong aorist. Well, here's a strong aorist, and as you can see from lambano, we take the aorist root lab, and then we add the present participle endings. There is one participle used often enough that it's worth learning all by itself. That is the participle of eīmī. It's used 189 times in the Greek New Testament. And as you can see, well, eīmī is an interesting verb, isn't it? we have own being nominative masculine singular and quite often found in the New Testament, and on being the nominative neuter singular. And then we have just the third declension noun endings, onta, ontos, onti, ontes, etc. and usa, usan, etc. It kind of makes sense. You can most easily find these videos by subscribing to my YouTube channel, NT Greek Made Easier, or by following me on x.com at Rob McIver 2024. And hey, if you found this video helpful, why not let me know by clicking on the like button below or by clicking on the heart icon. Thank you.